Hello everybody, welcome back to Eng Lang Pro's YouTube channel. My name is Tori and we are continuing on with our Year 11 content today. This is specifically from Unit 1 area of Study 2, the one I call the Language Acquisition area of study. And today we're going to be talking about the Universal Grammar Theory, which is one of two linguistic theories you'll be looking at in Year 11 to do with how people acquire language, so how they learn their languages. So Noam Chomsky, who's actually still alive, I was surprised to find out recently, is a linguist who is very well known for his theory, the Universal Grammar Theory. Today we're going to be learning about that. So to start off with, I'm just going to show you guys this video, which I think is fantastic, and it describes the kind of general overview that you need to know very, very well.
Language sets us apart. Other animals communicate, but they don't have anything approaching the sophisticated grammar of human languages. How is it that we learn to speak and think in language so easily? Young children become adept in a new language very quickly. Since the dawn of philosophy, thinkers have argued about whether or not we have innate ideas, whether we are born knowing things as Plato believed, or rather as John Locke and other empiricists argued, the mind is a blank slate on which experience writes. An American linguist, Noam Chomsky, gave a twist to this debate in the 1960s by demonstrating that children learning to speak just don't have enough information to form the complex grammatical maneuvers that allow them to generate unlimited new and original sentences. Yet they do so with ease. There's a poverty of stimulus. Something else must be going on. Chomsky's hypothesis was that there are inborn structures in our brain, what he called a language acquisition device, or LAD, which gives us a natural propensity to organize the spoken language that we hear in various grammatical ways. Without that, we couldn't get started as language learners. If he's right, language structure is hardwired as a kind of universal grammar. Our slates have been written on before we emerge from the womb.
So I'll link that down below so you guys can have a bit more of a look, but it's really good at just giving an overview. So let's dive a little bit more in depth into those specific features of universal grammar theory that were mentioned in the video. So first of all, the language acquisition device, which is kind of just something like an abstract idea of a center in the brain that children are born with. So we're all born with this. It's innate. It's not influenced. It's not created or grown from or grows through experience post-birth. So that's what's important, is that it's hardwired into us and it's not created with experience or hearing things or hearing language from other people around us when we're born. I'm going to leave universal grammar theory here for 1 minute while we go on to do a little bit of extra on a slightly different theory, which you guys will also need to know about, and that is the critical age hypothesis. So this is the part of Eng Lang where we combine a little bit of philosophy and a little bit of psychology in this whole theory stuff. Critical age hypothesis is the idea attributed to Lenneberg in 1967, where they said there's a period of childhood to puberty, so before puberty, basically. Childhood is where we can learn a language to native proficiency. It's the critical age where you need to learn language during that time in order to become a fluent, proficient speaker. This is kind of based on the idea that neuroplasticity, so if you do year 12 psych, I think you'll be a little bit familiar with this, or year 11 psych actually, that your neurons throughout childhood are very plastic, meaning they're able to change their pathways in the brain very easily. And this is much more malleable before puberty. And then once you've hit adulthood, your brain is a little bit more hardwired and isn't as easily, kind of Play-dohed into a different form. It's much more difficult to create new neural connections and change previous ones compared to in childhood. And this might be something that you guys can see yourselves in the fact that it is easier for children to learn a language to proficiency compared to adults. At least there's some research to suggest that. So if you guys are unfamiliar with research papers, each are given a DOI, which is I think like an online index, which if you guys copy and paste this into Google, you'll be able to find this article, Johnson and Newport, 1989. So their study is comparing adults and children who came from non-English speaking backgrounds and migrated to America, I think. And they tested them on their language. And it was found that pretty much linearly, those who were younger when they first got to America learned English their English scored much higher than people who only got there when they were adults. So they did a language test, and the younger you were when you got to America and started learning English, the better your English was. So that's kind of a support for the critical age hypothesis that suggests that you need to learn language in childhood to be able to speak, quote unquote, perfectly the way a native speaker would, someone who learns it as their first language. We'll get to people who don't learn a first language in a second, but there's a few questions I want you to consider in terms of the critical age hypothesis. So the first one is, does this mean adults can't learn a second language to proficiency at all? And you can have a little bit of a think about that. You might have people who have learnt a language post-puberty and can speak it very well. Which kind of debunks this theory a little bit. It's a bit, hard to say based on anecdotes. But for example, my mum came to Australia post-puberty when she was adult, and she's one of the best speakers of English I know. So that kind of, critical age theory is not, I don't want to get my own thoughts and opinions mixed into this, but not something I'm a huge believer of. But I digress. Something you'll need to learn is to separate your own opinions from theories as you learn them in year 11 and 12. Other queries. Does this mean that the language acquisition device that we were talking about before from Chomsky is part of those synaptic connections that decline post-puberty? Is Chomsky saying that the language acquisition of children that is innate and drilled into us before birth, is that something that still exists after birth? Is this something that, is considered part of universal grammar theory? Some questions for you guys to think about. All right, so moving back up to poverty of stimulus, and this is a very, very exciting section with a lot to talk about. So Chomsky is arguing that one of the kind of supporting pieces of evidence or sub-theories, I guess, that support the theory of universal grammar is poverty of stimulus, where basically he's saying where stimulus is what children hear around them, that them hearing parts of language, sentence fragments, random words from all these different people out of context, in context, words that, they'll never even have to say ever versus stuff they'll hear all the time, it's not enough to explain why they're able to speak so well and be able to speak so sophisticatedly and speak in full sentences despite only hearing, whatever they hear. That's the thing, is it's very individual, right? So that's one of the arguments. Another one, convergence, is that children grow to speak in the same grammatical rules, even though they hear different inputs. So someone who, hears some ungrammatical conversations will still learn correct grammar, despite only hearing a predominantly incorrect grammar. If children were completely devoid of language stimulus is a question. So poverty of stimulus is only relative. So in Chomsky's case, he's saying the stimulus that we hear when we're children is just not enough to explain how well we can speak. But if you're completely devoid of stimulus, what would happen? And this is obviously extremely unethical, so we can't provide proper trials and research into this. But there have been situations of extreme abuse where there have been children who have been devoid of stimulus. And Jeannie Wiley is one of those children. This is something that I expect you'll likely look into in class. It's a child who was faced with terrible abuse from her parents or just her father. Not too sure. Let me have a look. So Jeannie is an American child who was facing extreme social isolation until the age of 13, I believe, when she was rescued by a social worker. During that time, she wasn't spoken to. And so the argument is she able to go on to develop language and grammar? And she isn't. She was able to learn some words and some phrases, and there was a whole lot of, for lack of better word, drama around researching her in terms of ethics, and some lawsuits took place. So unfortunately, proper research with publishable findings wasn't really given. But what we do know is that she wasn't really able to grasp grammatical rules, just words and phrases. Now, of course, because it's a case study, there's a lot of confounders. Like, this poor girl was, of course, extremely traumatized. There would have been other brain part damage that would have occurred throughout her traumatic childhood. We can't say for sure that it is a support of the critical age hypothesis. But if it is something that might be argued in support of it. So just to summarize, the idea that children who are completely devoid of language stimulus throughout development cannot learn grammar post-childhood supports the critical age hypothesis. And if it were to also support the universal grammar hypothesis, you'd have to argue that the language acquisition device is something that doesn't persist beyond childhood. So that's an interesting kind of idea as well. So let's move on to universality. The third, I would say that there's three. Okay, actually, let me talk about this link here. So I've got a very passionate probably linguistics student, haven't looked into it, but there is a research article here. What exactly is universal grammar, and has anyone seen it? Which I think is a very good debunk of universal grammar theory. And it goes into extreme detail about universal grammar theory and what supports and negates it. It's a very complex read for Year 11. So I'm not in any way suggesting you need to look at this, but this is a paper that I got a lot of these ideas from. And if you feel up to it, please do have a little bit of a read, maybe just at the abstract, and have a little bit of look more into universal grammar. But it kind of suggests that there's three parts to the universal grammar theory, and that's poverty of stimulus, convergence, and universality. So now we're going to talk about universality. And this is the idea that all human languages have shared grammatical structures. So how is it that someone who is born in Australia and learns English from birth has similar grammatical structures in English to an Indigenous language in North America, for example? And here are some of the underlying universal grammatical structures. Words to describe quantity. So there are, I think, tangent, but I did read somewhere, and I'll link it in here, that there's only one language that doesn't have some of these features, that kind of communicates in clicks and stuff like that. I'll link it in here so you guys will have access to it. I'll just put it here. Words to describe quantity. So 1, 2, 3, there are words for each of those everywhere. Negation. So being able to say something is not something. Nouny and verby words and questions, the ability to ask questions and the ability to make commands are also universal. Now, other things that are universal, we're all humans. We all, there's exposure to one thing, two thing, three thing. There's a little bit of a question with universality, whether universal context and environment might contribute to that development of language. But again, not to induce my own bias, but it's always good to think critically about these things. So that is the kind of overview. Actually, no, it's quite in-depth, quite an in-depth discussion about universal grammar. So what you might be asked to do in your year 11 is to do some research on universal grammar and then write and answer some questions, or work with a pair to discuss, do you believe universal grammar is true? What is some evidence for? What is some evidence against? You might be asked to go out and do your field work on universal grammar. So in year 11, there is an assignment task to do with field work where you are tasked with listening to conversations around you in the real world and analyzing them. So, for example, you might as a class go to the local primary school with permission, of course, and just listen to the children speak and write down some of the patterns that you notice. And that might help with being able to connect the English language theory that we learn in class to English language in real life. And it's something that you'll definitely need to take into year 12. So universal grammar might be one of those things that you're asked to look into in terms of field work. But there are other things that you'll need to know in this area of study. Universal grammar theory is only one of the theories, and the next video I'm going to talk about the second theory, which is usage-based. So that's a little bit more to do with environmental stimulus, supporting your ability to learn language rather than an innate biological component. So really, if we want to boil it down to the most basics, this theory is your nature, and usage-based is your nurture argument for language acquisition. So I hope this has been helpful for you guys learning your theories in language acquisition. I will see you guys in the next one. See you later.